Brother turned my life into hell, then got my wife pregnant. Now he begs for my help after our parents cut him off and gave me their $2 million inheritance. You know, sometimes life hits you with a betrayal so deep, so gut-wrenching, that it changes the very fabric of who you are. But what if that betrayal comes not just from your wife, but from the brother who made your childhood a living hell? And then years later, after your parents cut him off and hand you millions, he comes crawling back for help. Can you even imagine that kind of twisted karma? Because that's my life, and honestly, the shock is still wearing off. My younger brother, David, has always carried this deep, ugly resentment towards me. And if you think it was jealousy, you'd be dead wrong. He was the golden child. I was just there. There was absolutely no reason for him to envy me. Our mom, she indulged David in everything. He was the sun and moon in her sky. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, even asked me to help him with his schoolwork. I was just expected to assist him because we were family. I never got that same consideration. I just accepted it. Maybe it was partly my fault, always meeting his needs without expecting anything back. He never helped me. He only ever approached me when he wanted something. While I was a quiet, introverted kid who loved to study, David was loud and rough, just like our dad. I also tend to be straightforward, honest, no sugarcoating. I think my mother even formed a negative perception of me because of it. This favoritism, it made David the family darling, and I didn't mind it much when we were little. But things changed. He started bullying and mocking me for being different. He'd tease me about my height, my glasses. He'd sneak into my room, read my diary, and then run to Mom to complain about what I'd written. When I'd yell at him, or try to complain to our parents about my privacy being invaded, they'd just laugh it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. He did worse things. He almost broke my glasses once. He'd put nasty things in my food, even little stones in my cereal. Luckily, I found them before I could chip a tooth. When I told Mom, she just brushed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just how brothers bond." Like it was normal. Like it was okay. Whenever we fought, David would go straight for my insecurities. We went to the same school, so he knew I was being bullied by some kids. Instead of supporting me, he'd side with them, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, even egging them on, telling them I was just a big failure. Another time, during a fight over some trivial thing I can't even remember, he told me to kill myself. Most insults just rolled off me, but that one really hurt. I was struggling with my mental health back then, and to hear my own brother say he wanted me dead, it was devastating. Dad was often at work, and Mom didn't seem to care. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating David. Things just kept getting worse. In high school, there was a shocking incident. David actually tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably Mom defended him, saying he was just playing. Seriously? Who plays like that? Thankfully, Dad finally sided with me. He saw the gravity of it, and he actually threatened to call the police on David. That was a real eye-opener for my brother. He'd never faced consequences before. He was stunned. Dad made it clear that enough was enough, that David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room to talk. I never expected his support. He always told David how similar they were. But he admitted he'd waited years, hoping David would mature, but he was becoming a bully. Hearing that from my dad, it was incredibly validating. I almost broke down. I confessed everything David had done, even the bullying at school. Dad was shocked at how much I'd endured. The next day, he spoke to the principal, ensuring the bullies would face severe consequences. That evening, he enrolled me in MMA at our local gym. He told me I needed to man up and stand up to bullies. A nerdy kid like me trying to fight might seem laughable, but I was focused. I balanced my studies and daily workouts. Those MMA classes completely changed my life, both physically and mentally. One day, David was up to his old tricks. He stole my pocket money, which I'd been saving for ages from chores. I caught him just as he was about to cycle off with his friends. I demanded he give it back. David just mocked me, saying all I could do was run to Daddy. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him. Right in the face. He was stunned. Fell backward. I retrieved my money and threw him back down. David started crying loudly, which honestly was pretty comical. Of course, Mom rushed out. When she heard I'd fought him, she was shocked and reprimanded me, saying I should be a better role model. David just soaked it all in, enjoying my scolding. Mom even complained to Dad, saying I needed to be controlled. Dad grimly asked us both to explain. I told him how David had stolen the money I'd worked hard for. David tried to justify it, saying he needed the money for a date, and as his brother, I should help him. But Dad told David he was lucky I only punched him. Anyone else would have called the police. He told David he had no right to take others' things without consent. David threw a tantrum, probably hoping Mom would side with him, but Dad remained firm. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for being hit, he screamed how much he hated me and ran to his room, locking himself in. After that incident, David finally began to distance himself. He understood he couldn't bully me anymore, that even Dad had stopped supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. He couldn't physically harm me, but he'd resort to verbal insults when Mom and Dad weren't around. His behavior just worsened with age, angrier, more short-tempered. If I asked him a question, he'd ignore me, muttering nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate, he'd go through Mom. When I asked her why David couldn't just talk to me, she'd urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell if it was just puberty or genuine hatred. Dealing with his comments became unbearable. I desperately longed to move out. I asked Mom repeatedly to mediate a conversation, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she'd just brush off the question. Eventually, I left for my dream university, a scholarship student. Dad threw a party for me, and even Mom seemed proud. But David remained aloof, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left for college was a mix of excitement for the future and pure relief to escape that toxic home. The first few months were liberating. New friends, great classes, building a life free from the constant fear of David's verbal attacks. It was peace. During my second year, I met my wife, Karen, at a frat party. We just clicked. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside marriage was a big deal. But when we found out she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to get married right after graduation. Our wedding was small but joyful. Our parents were happy. I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to. Despite other women showing interest, I never pursued it. I was genuinely content. Karen was my dream girl. I never wanted to hurt her. But later, I uncovered 2 incidents of infidelity. One was an on-again, off-again affair with her married coworker that spanned years. The other was a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend. Looking back, yeah, maybe I was naive. Each time, I chose to forgive her. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home. I believed we could overcome it. The coworker affair happened when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful mistakes. For a while, things seemed to get better. I could never fully trust her, but I tried my best to set aside my doubts. If I chose to forgive, I had to work towards a fresh start. It had been 4 years since that second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision. Karen seemed to have changed. We were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. But 3 months ago, my world shattered again. She revealed she'd been having a long-term affair, and suggested our son might not even be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Shock, betrayal, disbelief. All of it. I struggled to comprehend it. In a daze, I managed to ask why she kept such a secret, how she could do something so devastating. Her reaction was cold, indifferent, like she was detached from the pain she caused. Her vague responses just left me with more questions. It was surreal. I pressed her for the truth. I felt I deserved to know the father of the child I'd been raising since birth. Finally, she admitted it. It was David. My eyes widened in shock. What do you mean, David? She explained that they became friends when I introduced her to my family. She'd stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, usually so cold to me, was warm and polite towards her. I was glad. I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. Karen wanted to be accepted into my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mom. She noticed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it. I opened up, telling her our relationship was strained, probably beyond repair. Karen understood, but then started including David in our outings, hoping it would help us bond. If we planned to watch a movie, she'd invite David, and we'd watch whatever he chose. During that time, David and I actually exchanged a few words, which was an improvement. I remember Karen and David hanging out, playing video games. I never thought much of it. Karen told me that one day, David opened up to her about struggles with a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he struck up a friendship. She said he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The image of my wife and brother sleeping together, it made me feel sick. Karen confessed she felt guilty afterward and left him, which matched her abrupt decision to go home instead of spending New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant. When we met back at college, she was her usual cheerful self. I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's. With no way to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. This was why we got married. My world came crashing down. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been sleeping with David recently. She slowly nodded. She revealed they had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They'd sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. Half her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked why she married me if she wanted my brother. Karen said she didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father to our son and decided to stay. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Karen I was glad she told me the truth, but I was packing up and leaving. She started crying, asking for forgiveness. She expected me to yell, but I just calmly packed my clothes. She insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she changed tactics, saying our son would be affected by a divorce, that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be the father, which made her cry more and accuse me of being cruel. It seemed like she believed nothing could make me want to leave. Maybe it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past. While I did love her, it was more rooted in thinking we had a son together and being together since college. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I had no patience left. Trust was a major issue, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes, because we're all flawed. But this was beyond acceptable limits. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents' house and revealed everything about my wife's affair with David. I explained how they'd been secretly sleeping together for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, Mom initially tried to defend David, insisting her boy could never do such a thing to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. I wanted to catch him off guard, making him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered, I confronted him. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. But when I told him Karen had admitted everything, he started blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone. David mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing our parents had heard everything. David went quiet. Then he spluttered, trying to explain himself to salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself, desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, once so protective, now feeling a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I'd endured David's torment. Now the truth was out, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my father, usually reserved, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone. David, my father began, his voice heavy with disappointment, what you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money. Throughout this, I remained composed. I initially wanted to scream at David, but watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he'd underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, still tried to justify him, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's attempts to explain. Afterward, Mom approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support. Amid the family turmoil, she apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined this, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, Dad helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more than her. But her affair played heavily in my favor. We also did a paternity test. It was confirmed. David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. However, I decided to stay strong. Karen begged me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be punished. But I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, a sense of freedom washed over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone. I'd married so young and never really had the chance to experience independence. However, my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was considering changing his will. He didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn. Once he decided to cut David out, he stuck to it. David tried reaching out to our parents, even showed up at their doorstep begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even Mom, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, seemed done with him, though it must have been hardest for her. David never texted me to apologize, showing he didn't regret his actions. He was just upset about being cut off. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me. He wanted to ensure David wouldn't contest it later, so he'd leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock. My dad had worked hard his entire life. Including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, the total came to nearly $2 million. The only condition was that if Dad passed away before Mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this. I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Somehow, David found out about this. Unable to reach our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to make amends. He explained how he was struggling with college, and how, after Karen discovered the paternity, she'd been pestering him for child support. He said he had no money, was looking for part-time jobs, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family, to start fresh, because he really needed my help. I laughed, right in his face. I told him I was done with him. I reminded him he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair, and that Karen was also to blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child, since these were the consequences of his own actions. David started to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David began to cry. He told me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were done, and that he should never call me again, since I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed that conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for him, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were kids. And I won't lie, it did hurt me a bit to hear him so helpless. So here's what happened next. Most of you correctly guessed it was Mom who informed David about Dad changing his will, leading to his desperate call to me. I confronted her in front of Dad. She broke down, saying I had punished David enough, and that he had learned his lesson. Dad firmly told her that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her, because he could never forgive such a betrayal. That threat silenced my mother. Dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again, and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned, Dad is very stubborn. Hopefully, Mom will learn from her mistakes. It's been 5 months since my last update, and my relationship with my parents has improved significantly. Dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a buddy than a son. Although Mom misses David, she has stayed away. The last I heard about David was from my cousin. He'd been asking everyone for money, and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are living together, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which I guess is a good thing. I never discuss David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone, as I feel I still need time and space to heal. I've been going to therapy, so we'll see how that works out. Hearing David break down, seeing his carefully constructed world fall apart, it was a strange mix of vindication and something else, something I'm still trying to process. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally standing on my own 2 feet, free from the shadow of his cruelty. What about you? What would you have done in my place? Is there any coming back from a betrayal like that? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.